The train lurched to a stop at the desolate platform, and Katherine stepped onto the dusty boards with nothing but a carpetbag and a heart heavy with resignation, certain that this barren corner of Nevada would offer her nothing more than solitude and an escape from the memories that haunted her back in Philadelphia. The year was 1878, and Sloan was barely more than a collection of weather-beaten buildings clustered along a single rutted road, existing solely because the railroad needed a place to take on water between more important destinations. Laura's shoes clicked against the wooden platform as she surveyed her new home, the late afternoon sun beating down mercilessly on the parched landscape. She had accepted a position as a seamstress here after seeing an advertisement in the newspaper, desperate to put distance between herself and the life she had known. Behind her, the train whistle shrieked, and the locomotive began its laborious journey onward, leaving her standing alone with the settling dust. The station master, an elderly man with wire-rimmed spectacles, had already disappeared inside the small office, apparently uninterested in the arrival of yet another Easterner seeking a fresh start in the West. Laura picked up her bag and began walking toward what she hoped was the main street, her dark traveling dress already collecting a film of Nevada dust. She had been given directions to a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, where she would rent a room above the dress shop she would be operating. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders with each step. She had left behind everything familiar, fled from the humiliation of a broken engagement to a man who had chosen her younger, prettier sister instead. The pain was still raw, but she told herself that here, in this forgotten place, she could at least suffer in private. The boarding house stood 2 stories tall, its paint faded to an uncertain gray that might once have been blue. Laura climbed the steps to the porch and knocked firmly on the door, determined to present herself as competent and self-sufficient, even if she felt neither. A woman in her 50s answered, her face lined but kind, her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "You must be Miss Katherine from Philadelphia. I am Mrs. Patterson. Please, come in out of that awful heat." The interior was mercifully cooler, with lace curtains filtering the harsh sunlight into something more bearable. Mrs. Patterson led Laura up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "The dress shop is just below, accessible from the outside. I will show you in the morning when the light is better. For now, you should rest and freshen up. Supper is at 6, and I will not tolerate lateness." Laura thanked her and closed the door, finally alone with her thoughts. She sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of weakness, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The silence of the room was oppressive, broken only by the distant sounds of horses and men's voices from the street below. This was her life now, solitude and work, far from everyone who had witnessed her humiliation. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her sewing supplies on the small table near the window. By the time she heard the dinner bell ring downstairs, she had composed herself, splashing water on her face and smoothing her dark hair back into its neat bun. The dining room held a long table where 4 other boarders were already seated. Mrs. Patterson made brief introductions as Laura took her place. There was Mr. Henderson, who worked as a clerk at the general store, Miss Abernathy, a schoolteacher with a pinched expression, and 2 railroad workers whose names Laura immediately forgot. They all nodded politely but with little interest, and she was grateful to be left mostly alone as she ate the simple meal of beef stew and cornbread. After supper, she returned to her room and sat by the window as darkness fell over Sloan. Oil lamps began to glow in windows along the street, and she could hear music and laughter drifting from what must have been a saloon somewhere nearby. The sounds of other people's joy only emphasized her isolation. This was exactly what she had wanted, she reminded herself. No complications, no heartbreak, just work and quiet and the slow healing that might come with time. Sleep came fitfully that first night, the unfamiliar sounds and the hard mattress keeping her restless. When dawn broke, pale and hot even in the early hours, Laura rose and dressed carefully, determined to make a good impression in her new role. Mrs. Patterson met her at the base of the stairs with a large key. The previous seamstress left rather suddenly, Mrs. Patterson explained as she unlocked the shop door. Ran off with a prospector, if you can imagine such foolishness. She left the place in decent order at least. You should find everything you need. The shop was indeed well equipped, with a solid sewing machine, bolts of fabric, and all the necessary tools of the trade. Sunlight streamed through the front window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Laura felt a small stirring of something that might have been hope. Here, at least, was something she could control, work she was good at, a purpose to fill her days. She spent the morning cleaning and organizing, taking inventory of the supplies and making notes of what would need to be ordered. Around midday, her first customer arrived, a rancher's wife with fabric for curtains that needed hemming. Laura measured carefully and quoted a fair price, and the woman seemed satisfied, promising to tell her friends about the new seamstress in town. By late afternoon, Laura had seen 3 more customers and felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects. She was closing up the shop, her back aching from bending over the sewing machine when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats outside. Through the window, she saw a group of cowboys riding into town, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. They were whooping and calling to each other, clearly in high spirits after what must have been a long cattle drive. Laura watched them with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Cowboys had a reputation, and she had no desire to attract unwanted attention. She quickly locked the shop door and hurried upstairs to her room, telling herself she was being prudent, not cowardly. At supper, the other boarders were full of gossip about the arriving cowboys. "They have been on the trail for 2 months," Mr. Henderson announced importantly. "Bringing cattle up from Arizona, they will be in town for at least a week while the herd rests before moving on." Miss Abernathy sniffed disapprovingly. "I suppose that means noise and drunkenness and all manner of unseemly behavior." Laura kept her eyes on her plate and said nothing, but she felt a flutter of anxiety. She had come here for peace, and now it seemed chaos was literally riding into town. The next morning, she was arranging a display of ribbon in the shop window when the door opened behind her. She turned to greet the customer and found herself face to face with a tall cowboy, his hat in his hands, his sun-bronzed face breaking into a smile that transformed his rugged features into something unexpectedly appealing. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice deep and warm with a hint of Texas drawl. "I am looking for someone who might be able to mend a torn shirt. The boarding house lady said you might be willing." Laura found her voice, though it came out more formal than she intended. "Yes, of course. That is what I do." He pulled a shirt from the saddlebag he carried, and she could see it was good quality cotton with a long tear along the shoulder seam. "Got caught on some wire," he explained. "It is my only decent shirt, and I am hoping to look presentable when I go to the bank later." She took the shirt and examined the damage, very aware of his eyes on her. He was probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a striking shade of gray-blue. There was something open and honest in his expression that made her inexplicably nervous. I can have it ready by this afternoon, she said, retreating behind the safety of professional competence. It will be 50 cents. That is more than fair. Thank you, Miss. He paused expectantly. Katherine, Miss Katherine. She did not offer her first name. Pleased to meet you, Miss Katherine. I am Harrison Wade. Most folks call me Harry. He smiled again, and she noticed the way it crinkled the corners of his eyes. I will come back around 3 if that suits you. After he left, Laura stood holding his shirt, wondering why her heart was beating faster than it should. She shook her head firmly and sat down at her sewing machine. She had no interest in cowboys or charm or any of the complications that came with men. She had come here to be alone, and that was exactly how she intended to stay. But when Harrison Wade returned at 3 o'clock sharp, she found herself taking extra care as she handed him the mended shirt, making sure he saw the neat, nearly invisible stitching. His face lit up with genuine appreciation. This is excellent work, Miss Katherine. You can barely tell it was ever torn. He paid her and pulled the shirt on over his undershirt right there in the shop, apparently unconcerned about propriety. Laura felt her cheeks warm and looked away, but not before noticing the broad strength of his shoulders. Thank you for your business, Mr. Wade, she said primly. Harry, he corrected gently. And I expect I will be seeing you again. A man can always use a good seamstress. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and left, but not before giving her another one of those disarming smiles. Laura told herself the flutter in her stomach meant nothing. She had more customers that afternoon, including 2 more cowboys with mending work, though neither of them made the same impression that Harrison Wade had. By the time she closed the shop, she was tired but satisfied with her second day of work. At supper, she learned more about the cattle drive from Mr. Henderson, who seemed to know everyone's business. That Wade fellow is the trail boss, he said. Youngest man to run a drive for the Double Bar Ranch. They say he is a natural with cattle and has a gift for getting through rough country without losing stock. His father was a famous Texas Ranger before he died. Laura absorbed this information silently, telling herself she was not particularly interested. But that night, lying in bed and listening to the sounds of laughter from the saloon down the street, she found herself thinking about gray-blue eyes and an unexpected smile. The next few days fell into a pattern. Laura worked in the shop, building a steady stream of customers, and Harrison Wade seemed to find excuses to stop by every day. First, it was buttons that needed replacing. Then he brought shirts belonging to his men, claiming they had all heard about her excellent work. He always lingered a bit, making conversation that was easy and free of any pressure or expectation. "How are you finding Sloan?" he asked one afternoon, leaning against the counter while she pinned a hem. "It is different from Philadelphia," she said carefully. "I imagine it is." "What made you come all this way?" Laura's hand stilled on the fabric. "I needed a change," she said finally, her tone discouraging further questions, but Harrison just nodded as though he understood perfectly. "I reckon we have all got reasons for being where we are. Sometimes starting fresh is the only thing that makes sense." She looked up at him then, surprised by the empathy in his voice. There was no prying curiosity in his expression, just acceptance. Something in her chest loosened slightly. "You ever miss Texas?" she asked, surprising herself with the personal question. "Every day," he admitted. "But the work takes me where it takes me. There is something about being on the trail under all that sky that makes a man feel both small and important at the same time. Hard to explain to someone who has not done it." "It sounds lonely," Laura said softly. "Sometimes," he agreed. "But then you ride into a town like this and meet interesting people, and it does not seem so lonely after all. The way he looked at her when he said it made Laura's breath catch. She bent her head back to her work, her fingers fumbling slightly with the pins. "Your friends must be wondering where you are, Mr. Wade." "Harry," he reminded her again, his tone gently teasing, "and they can manage without me for a spell. Besides, I am conducting important business getting our mending done." Despite herself, Laura felt the corners of her mouth twitch. "Is that what this is? Important business?" "The most important," he said solemnly, but his eyes were dancing with humor. After he left, Laura sat for a long moment, her hands idle in her lap. She was not supposed to feel this way, this lightness that seemed to fill her chest whenever Harrison Wade was near. She had built walls around her heart for good reason, and she could not let them crumble just because a cowboy had a kind smile and made her want to smile back. But the next day, when she heard his boots on the steps outside the shop, her heart lifted traitorously, and she found herself checking her reflection in the window before turning to greet him. "Morning, Miss Katherine," he said, and there was something different in his expression today, a nervous energy that had not been there before. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening after you close the shop. There is a place just outside town where you can see for miles. The sunset out here is something special, and I thought you might enjoy it, being new and all." Laura's first instinct was to refuse, to protect herself from the risk of caring, but when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "That would be nice. Thank you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine, and Laura felt something crack in the careful armor she had constructed around herself. That evening, she changed into her better dress, telling herself it was not really for him, she just wanted to look presentable. Harrison arrived exactly when he said he would, freshly shaved and wearing the shirt she had first mended for him. He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and they walked together through the dusty streets of Sloan, heading toward the open land beyond the last buildings. The silence between them was surprisingly comfortable. Laura found herself relaxing, letting the tension drain from her shoulders as they left the town behind. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all red rock and scattered sage under an enormous sky that was beginning to blaze with color as the sun sank lower. "Right about here is good," Harrison said, stopping at a slight rise that gave them a view of the surrounding desert. "Give it a few minutes." They stood side by side, and Laura watched as the sky transformed into streaks of orange, pink, and purple, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. The land itself seemed to glow in the horizontal light, every rock and plant sharply defined. She had never seen anything like it in Philadelphia, where buildings blocked the sky and smoke from factories hazed the air. "It is beautiful," she breathed, unaware that she had spoken aloud. "Worth the walk?" Harrison asked, and when she glanced at him, he was not looking at the sunset. He was looking at her. "Yes," she said quietly, holding his gaze. "Worth the walk." They talked as the light faded, easy conversation that ranged from the trivial to the meaningful. Harrison told her about growing up on his family's ranch, about losing his mother young and his father just last year. Laura found herself sharing more than she intended about her own family, about her sisters and her parents, and the suffocating expectations that had followed her everywhere in Philadelphia. "They wanted me to marry well and be decorative," she said with more bitterness than she intended. "When I was engaged, everyone seemed so pleased, as though I had finally done something right. And then when it ended, they looked at me with such pity, as though I was broken somehow." "Sounds like you are better off without them," Harrison said firmly. "Any man fool enough to let you go was not worth having in the first place." Laura laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "You are kind, but you do not know what happened. Do not need to know the details to know you deserve better than pity and people who make you feel less than you are. He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest in the fading light. From where I am standing, you are brave as hell, begging your pardon for the language. You came all this way by yourself, started over in a place where you did not know a soul. That takes strength. Something hot and painful pressed against Laura's throat. No one had called her brave before. Foolish, perhaps, proud, running away, but never brave. "Thank you," she whispered. Harrison smiled, that wonderful warm smile that made her feel like the sun was still shining. "We should head back before it gets full dark. Would not want Mrs. Patterson thinking I kept you out inappropriately late." They walked back to town under the emerging stars, and when Harrison left her at the boarding house door, he touched his hat brim and said, "I have enjoyed this evening, Miss Katherine. I hope we can do it again." "Laura," she said impulsively. "My name is Laura." His smile could have lit the whole town. "Laura, that is a beautiful name." After he left, Laura climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in months. She was not ready to examine what was happening between her and Harrison Wade too closely, but she could not deny that something had shifted. The loneliness she had expected to be her constant companion had begun to lift, replaced by something that felt dangerously like hope. Over the following days, Harrison found reasons to see her daily. Sometimes he brought legitimate mending work. Sometimes he just stopped by to talk, leaning against the doorframe of her shop and making her laugh with stories about the trail or his cowboy cruise antics. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words that made the hard, dangerous work of cattle driving sound like an adventure. "There was this one time in a thunderstorm," he told her one afternoon, "when the cattle stampeded in the middle of the night. We all rode out to turn them, and I ended up chasing this one stubborn steer through a creek and up a hill, in the pouring rain, lightning flashing everywhere. By the time I got him turned back toward the herd, I was covered in mud from head to toe, and my horse was giving me the most disgusted look, like he could not believe I had dragged him into this mess." Laura laughed, really laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "What did you do?" "Well, we got back to camp eventually, and all the boys started calling me Mud Wade instead of Harrison Wade for the rest of the drive. Took me weeks to live it down." His eyes crinkled with the memory. "But we did not lose a single head of cattle that night, so I figured it was worth a little humiliation." "You love it," Laura observed. "The work, even when it is hard." "I do," Harrison admitted. "There is something about being out there, being responsible for something bigger than yourself. Those cattle represent someone's livelihood, maybe their whole future. Getting them where they need to go safely matters." Laura found herself admiring his sense of purpose, the way he took pride in doing his work well. It reminded her of how she felt about her own sewing, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful or making something broken whole again. As the days passed, Laura realized she was watching for Harrison's arrivals, listening for his distinctive knock on the shop door. She began to notice little things about him. The way he always held doors for her, how he listened with complete attention when she spoke, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her move a heavy bolt of fabric. He made her feel seen in a way she never had before, not as a daughter who needed to be married off or a sister overshadowed by prettier siblings, but as Laura, interesting and worthy in her own right. One evening, he invited her to dinner at the town's only restaurant, a modest establishment but clean and respectable. Over fried chicken and potatoes, he told her about his plans for the future. "I am saving up to buy my own ranch," he said. "I have been working toward it for 5 years now. Another year or two of trail driving, and I will have enough for a good piece of land and a starter herd. Where would you want this ranch?" Laura asked, trying to keep her voice casual even as her heart sank at the reminder that Harrison's life was elsewhere, that he would leave Sloan when his business here was done. "I have been thinking about Nevada, actually," he said, looking at her intently. "There is good grazing land not too far from here, and the railroad makes it easier to get cattle to market. A man could build something solid here." Laura felt her breath catch at the implication in his words, but she was afraid to read too much into it. "It sounds like you have it all planned out." "Some of it," Harrison said, "but I am learning that the best things in life are not always the ones you plan for." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture that felt both bold and natural. "I am glad the trail brought me to Sloan, Laura." "I am glad too," she whispered, turning her hand over to lace her fingers with his. Walking back to the boarding house that night, Harrison held her hand openly, a declaration to the town that they were courting. Laura felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. She was letting herself care, letting herself hope, and it was terrifying. But when she looked up at Harrison's profile in the lamplight, saw the strength and kindness there, she thought maybe, just maybe, it would be worth the risk. "The drive will be moving on in 3 days," Harrison said as they reached the boarding house. His voice was quiet, serious. "I have to go with them. That is my job, my responsibility to the ranch that hired me." Laura's stomach dropped. She had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it had not been before. "Of course," she managed. "I understand. But I will be back," Harrison said urgently, gripping both her hands now. "The ranch is in Arizona, and once we deliver the herd, I will have time off before the next drive. I can be back here in 2 weeks, maybe less. And Laura, I would like to come back, if you want me to." She looked up into his eyes, those gray-blue eyes that had become so dear to her in such a short time, and made a choice. She could protect her heart, send him away with polite words and no promises, retreat back into the safe loneliness she had planned for herself. Or she could be brave, the way he had called her brave, and reach for the happiness that seemed to shimmer just within grasp. "I want you to come back," she said firmly. "Very much." Harrison's face blazed with joy. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Then I will be back before you know it. I promise you, Laura." The next 3 days were bittersweet. Harrison spent every free moment with Laura, and she found herself closing the shop early to walk with him, to talk and laugh and learn everything she could about him before he had to leave. He introduced her to some of his crew, good men who teased him mercilessly about his sudden reluctance to get back on the trail. "Never seen the boss so moon-eyed over a woman," one of them said with a grin. "Must be something special about you, Miss Laura." "She is," Harrison said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Laura's heart turn over. On his last night in Sloan, they walked again to their spot outside town, watching the sunset paint the sky. Harrison was quieter than usual, and Laura could feel the tension in him, the impending separation weighing on them both. "I am not good with fancy words," Harrison said finally, "but I need you to know that this, what is between us, it is real for me. I know it has been quick, but I have never felt like this about anyone. When I am with you, everything makes sense. When I think about the future I am working toward, you are in it. If you will have me, that is." Laura's throat was tight with emotion. "It is real for me too. I came here thinking I would spend my life alone, that I was safer that way. But you have made me want more than just safety. You have made me want to live again, to be happy." Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his calloused palms rough and warm against her skin. "Can I kiss you, Laura? I have been wanting to since the first day I walked into your shop." "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her softly, carefully, as though she was something precious. Laura melted into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. The kiss deepened, and she tasted the promise of everything they could be together, all the laughter and warmth and partnership that seemed to glow between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe less. I will push the men hard to get back quickly. Be safe, Laura whispered. Come back to me. Nothing could keep me away. The next morning, Laura stood outside her shop and watched Harrison ride out with his crew, and the cattle, a river of animals and men flowing out of Sloan and into the vast desert. He turned in his saddle and waved, and she waved back until he was just a speck in the distance, then gone entirely. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Laura went back into her shop and tried to work, but her hands were clumsy and her mind kept drifting. She had known him for such a short time, barely 2 weeks, but his absence left a hole in her days that felt impossibly large. Mrs. Patterson noticed her distraction at supper. Mr. Wade seems like a good man, she said carefully. But you should know, dear, that cowboys are wanderers by nature. They make promises they mean at the time, but the trail has a way of calling them back. Harrison is different, Laura said, but even as she spoke, doubt crept in. What if Mrs. Patterson was right? What if the intensity of what they had felt was just the result of proximity and loneliness, something that would fade once Harrison was back in his real life? The days crawled by. Laura threw herself into work, taking on extra projects and staying in the shop long after dark. She sewed curtains and mended clothes and even made a dress for Miss Abernathy, who was surprised and pleased by the result. But at night, alone in her room, Laura let herself miss Harrison with an ache that was almost physical. She had been a fool to let herself care so quickly, to believe in happiness after she had sworn off such vulnerability. Every day that passed without word from him made the doubt grow stronger. Maybe he had realized that a seamstress from Philadelphia was not what he wanted for his future. Maybe the dream he had spoken of was just that, a dream with no substance behind it. 2 weeks became 3. Laura told herself there were good reasons for the delay. The drive could have encountered difficulties, or Harrison might have been needed at the ranch longer than expected. But her hope was beginning to fray at the edges, worn thin by waiting and uncertainty. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of her 4th week alone, she heard boots on the steps outside the shop. Her heart leaped even before she turned around, some part of her recognizing the sound of his gait. The door opened, and there he was, dusty from the road and looking tired but with eyes that lit up the moment they found her. Laura, Harrison said, and her name was a prayer on his lips. She did not remember moving, but suddenly she was in his arms and he was holding her like she was the most important thing in the world. "You came back," she said against his chest. "I told you I would. Did you doubt me?" "A little," she admitted, pulling back to look up at him. "Maybe more than a little." Harrison's expression grew serious. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere, not for long anyway. I talked to my boss about my plans. I have enough saved now to start looking at land, and he is willing to sell me some breeding stock on credit. Laura, I can start building that future I told you about, here near you." "Really?" Hope and fear warred in her chest. "Really?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture achingly tender. "But I need to know if you see a future with me too. I know it is fast, and I know I have no right to ask you to take a chance on a man whose life is unpredictable and hard. But I love you, Laura Katherine. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you looked at me with those serious eyes and told me my shirt would cost 50 cents. Laura laughed, a sound that was half sob. I love you too. I tried not to, I tried to protect myself, but you have made that impossible." He kissed her then, right there in the shop with the door standing open to the street, and Laura did not care who saw. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Harrison took a small box from his pocket. "I know we should wait, do this proper with a long engagement and all the right steps," he said. "But I have never been one for doing things the way they are supposed to be done. Laura, will you marry me?" The ring inside the box was simple, a small gold band with a single modest stone, but to Laura it was more beautiful than all the jewels in Philadelphia. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Harrison slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made just for her. They stood together in the golden afternoon light streaming through the shop window, holding each other and laughing with the pure joy of two people who had found something they had not even known to look for. The wedding was planned for a month later, time enough for Harrison to finalize the purchase of his land and for Laura to make herself a wedding dress. Mrs. Patterson was scandalized by the speed of it, all but secretly pleased, and she threw herself into helping Laura prepare. Even Miss Abernathy thawed considerably, offering to help with the flower arrangements. Harrison spent his days working on the land he had bought, 10 miles outside of Sloan. It was rough country, but there was water and grass, and he could see the potential in it. He hired a crew to help him build a house, nothing fancy but solid and weatherproof, with real glass windows and a stone fireplace. "I want to carry you over the threshold of a real home," he told Laura when she fretted about him working so hard. "Not some half-finished shack." Laura divided her time between the shop, which continued to thrive, and sewing the most beautiful dress she had ever made. It was cream-colored silk that Harrison had ordered special from San Francisco, refusing to let her pay for it. She worked on it in the evenings, each stitch a meditation on the future she was creating. Harrison came to town every few days, and they would walk together or sit on the porch of the boarding house, talking about their plans. He wanted to start with a small herd and build slowly. She wanted to keep the shop open, at least for a while, enjoying the independence her work gave her. They talked about everything, from the practical details of building a life together to their hopes and dreams. "I want children someday," Harrison said one evening, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars emerge. "A whole house full of noise and laughter. What do you think about that?" "I think it sounds wonderful," Laura said softly. "I used to think I would never have that, a family of my own. Now I cannot imagine anything better." The night before the wedding, Laura lay awake in her room, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Laura Wade, wife to a man who made her laugh and held her like she was precious, and looked at her like she hung the moon. The loneliness she had expected to be her life had been transformed into something rich and full of promise. The ceremony took place in the small church at the edge of Sloan, with Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Henderson as witnesses, and a surprising number of townspeople in attendance. Laura had not realized how many people had come to think of her as part of the community in her short time there. She walked down the aisle to where Harrison stood waiting, impossibly handsome in a new suit, and his face when he saw her in her dress made every late-night hour of sewing worthwhile. The minister led them through the vows, and when Harrison slipped the wedding band onto her finger next to her engagement ring, his hand was steady and sure. "I promise to fill your days with laughter and your nights with warmth," he said, departing from the traditional words. "I promise to stand beside you and love you for as long as I draw breath." Laura's voice was thick with emotion as she made her own promises, but she held his gaze and meant every word. When the minister finally pronounced them married and Harrison kissed her, A cheer went up from the congregation. The reception was held at the restaurant, which had closed for the occasion. There was food and music, and Laura danced with her new husband, feeling like she was floating. All the pain and humiliation she had fled from in Philadelphia seemed like it belonged to another life, another person. This was her life now, here in this raw western town with this good man who loved her. As evening fell, Harrison helped her into the wagon he had brought, loaded with her belongings from the boarding house. They drove out to the ranch under a sky blazing with stars, and Laura felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nerves. This was truly the beginning of everything. The house Harrison had built was better than she had imagined. It was small but well constructed, with a bedroom, a main room with the fireplace, and a kitchen area. He had even built her a workroom where she could continue her sewing. Lantern light glowed warm from the windows as they approached. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wade," Harrison said, lifting her down from the wagon. He swept her up into his arms, making her laugh and protest that he would hurt his back, but he carried her easily over the threshold and into their new home. He set her down gently, and they stood together in the quiet house, the air between them charged with anticipation. Harrison cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I love you so much, Laura. Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for not giving up when I tried to keep you at a distance," she replied, reaching up to pull his face down to hers. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left Laura feeling cherished and whole. Afterward, lying in Harrison's arms in their own bed in their own house, she thought about how wrong she had been about what her life in Nevada would be. She had expected loneliness, but Harrison had filled her days with laughter and her nights with warmth, exactly as he had promised. She had thought she was running away from love, but instead, she had run straight into it. The months that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Harrison worked from dawn until dusk building his herd and improving the ranch, and Laura kept the shop open 3 days a week, riding into town in the wagon Harrison had taught her to drive. She had never worked so hard in her life, but she had never been happier. The ranch slowly took shape around them. Harrison hired a young cowboy named Pete to help with the work, and Laura enjoyed having someone else to cook for, stretching her domestic skills in ways she never had back east. The three of them would sit around the table in the evenings, Harrison and Pete talking about cattle and grass and water, while Laura sewed and listened and felt deeply content. Harrison kept his promise about laughter. He found humor in the daily challenges of ranch life and shared it with her, making even difficult days bearable. When a cow got stuck in a mud hole and they all had to work for hours to free her, he joked about starting a cow rescue service. When Laura's first attempt at baking bread resulted in something closer to a brick, he declared it the perfect weapon for defending against rattlesnakes. "You are incorrigible," she told him, trying not to laugh. "You love me anyway," he said, pulling her into his arms, not caring that he was dusty and sweaty from the day's work. "I really do," she agreed and kissed him soundly. By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving. Harrison's careful management had resulted in a healthy, growing herd, and he was already looking at buying more land. Laura had achieved a balance between her shop work and her duties at the ranch, and she felt fulfilled by both. The day of their anniversary, Harrison surprised her by announcing they were taking the day off from work. "Pete can handle things for one day. I want to take my wife somewhere special." He drove them to a beautiful spot in the hills where a natural spring fed a small pool of clear water. Cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers dotted the grass. It was an oasis in the harsh landscape, private and peaceful. They spread a blanket and had a picnic lunch that Laura had prepared, then sat together with her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, watching the play of light on the water. "I have been thinking," Harrison said, his voice rumbling in his chest against her back, "about what you said when we first got married about wanting a family." Laura's heart skipped. "Yes, I love our life together, just the two of us. But if you are ready, I would like to start trying for a baby. No pressure, though. Whenever you are ready is fine with me." Laura turned in his arms to face him, her eyes bright. "I am ready. I have been ready for months but did not want to pressure you when you are working so hard to establish the ranch." Harrison's face split into a grin that rivaled the sun. "Well then, Mrs. Wade, I guess we had better get started on that project." She laughed and let him kiss her, and they spent the afternoon in their private paradise, celebrating their love and their life together. 3 months later, Laura woke one morning feeling decidedly unwell. She barely made it outside before losing the contents of her stomach. Harrison found her there, pale and shaky, and his face went white with concern. "Should I ride for the doctor?" he asked urgently. Laura wiped her mouth and started to laugh, which made Harrison look even more worried until she managed to say, "I do not need a doctor, or at least not yet. Harrison, I think I am pregnant." His expression went through several rapid changes, shock, hope, joy, before settling on overwhelming happiness. He picked her up and spun her around, then quickly set her down, worried he might make her sick again. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," she said. "I have missed 2 months and now this." "We are going to have a baby," Harrison said wonderingly. "Laura, we are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Laura suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as her belly grew, the work around the ranch became harder. Harrison was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over most of her chores and hiring a woman from town to help with the heavier housework. Laura kept the shop open as long as she could, but eventually she had to close it temporarily, too tired to manage the ride into town. On a cold February morning in 1880, Laura went into labor. Harrison sent Pete racing to town for the doctor and the midwife while he stayed by Laura's side, holding her hand through the contractions and doing his best to keep his own panic at bay. "You are doing so well," he kept saying. "You are so strong, Laura. I am right here." The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Harrison feared he might lose her, but Laura was stronger than either of them had known. When the baby finally came, a lusty, squalling boy with a full head of dark hair, she laughed through her tears of exhaustion. "A son," Harrison said, his voice choked with emotion as the midwife placed the cleaned and wrapped baby in his arms. "Laura, we have a son." They named him William Harrison Wade, after Harrison's father. Billy, as they immediately started calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged. Laura recovered from the birth slowly, but having Harrison and the hired woman to help made all the difference. Motherhood transformed Laura in ways she had not anticipated. She had always thought of herself as practical and somewhat reserved, but Billy brought out a fierce, protective love, and a silliness she had not known she possessed. She sang to him and talked to him constantly, narrating her days as she cared for him. Harrison was a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny, fragile life they had created. He would hold Billy for hours, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle, and all the things they would do together when Billy was older. Watching her husband with their son made Laura fall in love with him all over again. "You are wonderful with him," she said one evening as Harrison walked the floor with Billy, trying to coax him to sleep. "He is my son," Harrison said simply, as though that explained everything. And perhaps it did. As Billy grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Harrison's reputation as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher grew, and he was able to buy the adjacent property, nearly doubling their land. Laura reopened her shop on a limited basis, bringing Billy with her and setting up a play area in the corner where he could safely occupy himself while she worked. Life was full and busy, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was good. Laura thought often about the woman she had been when she stepped off that train in Sloan, so certain that loneliness was her destiny, so determined to avoid any risk to her heart. She could hardly recognize that woman now. When Billy was 2 years old, Laura discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to maintain her routines better. Their second child, a daughter they named Katherine Rose, was born on a mild spring day with far less drama than her brother's arrival. "She looks like you," Harrison said, cradling his daughter and marveling at her delicate features. "Poor girl," Laura teased, but her heart was full to bursting. With 2 children, the house felt wonderfully chaotic. Billy was into everything, a curious and energetic little boy who wanted to help his father with every ranch task. Katherine was calmer, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes that reminded Laura of her own. Harrison hired more help as the ranch grew, eventually building a bunkhouse for the cowboys who worked for them. Laura found herself cooking for a small army, but she did not mind. The long table in their expanded dining room was always full, and the sound of voices and laughter was a constant soundtrack to their lives. One evening, when Billy was 5 and Katherine was 3, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Billy was chattering about a calf he had helped feed, and Katherine was falling asleep against her father's shoulder. Harrison reached over and took Laura's hand, lacing their fingers together. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Coming out here, taking a chance on me?" Laura looked around at the ranch they had built together, at the children they had created, at the life that was so much richer than anything she had imagined back in Philadelphia. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." "I still think about that first day sometimes," Harrison said. "Walking into your shop with a torn shirt, not knowing that I was about to meet the woman who would change my whole life." "You changed mine too," Laura said softly. "I came here thinking I would live a small, quiet life, just me and my work. Instead, I got all this." She gestured to encompass the ranch, the children him. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed." "We gave it to each other," Harrison corrected, lifting her hand to kiss it. As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Billy grew into a strong young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and Katherine surprised everyone by showing a talent for raising horses. 2 more children arrived, another son named Peter and a daughter named Alice, filling the house with even more noise and love. Laura's hair gained threads of silver, and Harrison's face developed deep laugh lines around his eyes. They worked hard, weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years and supported each other through difficult ones. Their love, which had ignited so quickly in those first days in Sloan, had deepened into something even more profound, a partnership built on respect and laughter and unwavering commitment. On their 20th anniversary, Harrison took Laura back to the spot outside town where he had first kissed her. Their children were old enough now to manage without them for a day, and it felt like a luxury to steal away together. They stood in the same place, older now but still holding hands like young lovers. The sunset was just as beautiful as it had been all those years ago, painting the sky in glorious shades of fire and gold. 20 years, Harrison mused. Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "Do you remember what you promised me?" Laura asked, leaning into his side. "On our wedding day. I promised to fill your days with laughter and your nights with warmth," Harrison said. "Did I keep that promise?" Laura turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "Every single day. You have given me more joy than I ever thought possible. You took a woman who expected nothing but loneliness and gave her a life full of love. You did the same for me," Harrison said, pulling her close. "I was just drifting before I met you, moving from one job to the next without any real purpose. You gave me a reason to build something permanent, something that matters." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful together. The harsh Nevada landscape had become home, and the loneliness Laura had expected had been replaced by a life overflowing with family and purpose and abiding love. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow and start families of their own. Billy brought his wife to live on the ranch and began taking over more of the daily management. Katherine married a neighboring rancher and brought their families together through the union. Peter decided to become a doctor, studying in San Francisco, but always coming home for holidays. Alice became a teacher, following in the footsteps of the woman who had taught her in Sloan's small school. Laura and Harrison became grandparents, marveling at the new generation carrying forward the legacy they had built. The house that Harrison had constructed for his new bride expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Additions built onto the original structure until it rambled across the land, full of rooms where children and grandchildren could stay when they visited. On quiet evenings, when the house was full of family or blessedly empty, just the two of them, Laura and Harrison would sit together on the porch they had added to the front of the house. They would watch the sunset, that reliable daily miracle, and talk about everything and nothing, still finding new things to discover about each other even after so many years together. "I got a letter from my sister today," Laura said one such evening. She was in her 50s now, her dark hair more silver than brown, but her eyes were still bright and her smile still quick. "The one who married your former fiancé?" Harrison asked. He knew the story, of course, but it had been years since Laura had mentioned her family back east. "The same. She wanted me to know he passed away. Apparently, he was never quite as successful as he hoped, and he made her rather miserable with his drinking and poor business decisions. She is widowed now with 3 grown children who barely speak to her. How do you feel about that?" Harrison asked carefully. Laura was quiet for a moment, considering. "Mostly sad for her, I suppose, and grateful that things turned out the way they did. If he had not broken our engagement, I would never have come here. I would never have met you, never had this life. What felt like the worst thing that could happen to me turned out to be the biggest blessing." Harrison reached for her hand, worn and calloused from years of work, still perfectly suited to his own. "Funny how life works sometimes." "Not funny," Laura corrected, squeezing his fingers. "Miraculous. I arrived expecting loneliness, and you filled my days with laughter and my nights with warmth. You gave me a family and a home and a love I did not believe existed. That is not luck or chance. That is a miracle." "Then I am a man blessed with miracles," Harrison said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "Because every day with you has been a gift." As they sat together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Laura reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From Philadelphia to Sloan, from heartbreak to healing, from loneliness to a love that had filled her life to overflowing. The wild Nevada landscape that had seemed so foreign and harsh when she first arrived had become her truest home, and the cowboy who had walked into her shop with a torn shirt had become the center of her world. Their children brought their own children to the ranch for Sunday dinners, and the long table that Harrison had built could barely contain everyone. Laura would stand at the head of it, looking down at the faces of the family they had created, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. This abundance of love, this legacy of laughter and warmth, had started with a simple choice to trust, to hope, to love again when she thought her heart was closed forever. Harrison caught her eye across the table, and the look they shared held everything they had built together. Every challenge overcome, every joy celebrated, every promise kept. 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, the time passed, but the core of what they were together remained constant. When they grew too old to run the ranch themselves, Billy took over completely, but Laura and Harrison stayed in the house they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created. They watched the cattle move across their land, saw new fences go up and old ones repaired, celebrated the good years and weathered the difficult ones. On a summer evening in their later years, long after the sun had set and the family had gone home, Laura and Harrison sat together on their porch. Harrison's hair was white now, his movements slower, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her. Laura's hands were stiff with arthritis, making her beloved sewing difficult, but she could still hold her husband's hand, and that was what mattered most. "It has been a good life," Harrison said, his voice a little rough with age but still warm. "Better than I ever dared to dream." "The very best life," Laura agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustling of the wind through the cottonwood trees Harrison had planted 40 years ago. Somewhere in the house behind them, a clock chimed the hour, marking the passage of time that seemed both swift and eternal. "Remember that first sunset?" Laura asked, "when you brought me out beyond town and told me to wait for the colors?" "I was so nervous," Harrison admitted. "Thought you might tell me to take you back to town and never speak to you again." "I almost did," Laura said with a soft laugh. "I was so scared of feeling anything for anyone, but you made it impossible not to love you." "Best day of my life when you said you would marry me," Harrison said. "Well, second best. The best was actually marrying you." "What about when each of our children was born?" Laura teased. "All right, maybe it is a 5-way tie," Harrison conceded, and they both laughed. As they finally made their way inside for the night, moving slowly but still together, Laura thought about the young woman who had stepped off the train in Sloan all those years ago. That woman had been so certain she knew what her life would be, certain that loneliness was her destiny and solitude her shield. How wrong she had been, and how grateful she was for that wrongness. Harrison had kept every promise he made that wedding day and 1,000 promises he had never spoken aloud. He had filled her days with laughter through his humor and his stories, and the way he found joy even in difficulty. He had filled her nights with warmth through his love and his presence, and the family they had built together. He had taken a woman expecting loneliness and given her a life so full of love and meaning that she could hardly contain it all. As they lay in bed together, as they had for more than 40 years, Laura took Harrison's hand in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he murmured, already half asleep. "For everything, for finding me, for not giving up, for loving me, for this whole beautiful life." Harrison squeezed her hand. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense, for building this life with me. I love you, Laura Wade." "I love you too," she replied. "Always." They fell asleep as they had so many nights before, hands clasped, hearts intertwined, two souls who had found each other in the vast expanse of the American West and created something that would endure long after they were gone. The house around them held the echoes of decades of laughter and tears, arguments and reconciliations, ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, all woven together into the tapestry of a life well lived. The ranch continued to thrive under Billy's management, growing and changing with the times but maintaining the core values that Harrison and Laura had established. Their grandchildren brought their children to visit, and the stories of how Grandma Laura and Grandpa Harry met and built their life together became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and fires. In their final years, when age had slowed them both considerably, Laura and Harrison still sat together each evening, still held hands, still found things to talk about and laugh over. The love that had begun with a torn shirt and a 50-cent mending job had proven more durable than they had imagined possible, surviving everything life threw at them and emerging stronger for it. When Harrison passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Laura's hand in his and their children gathered around, his last words were characteristic of the man he had been. "It has been the greatest adventure, Laura. Thank you for riding it with me." Laura lived another 2 years without him, missing him every day but sustained by the incredible legacy they had built together. She spent her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching them to sew and telling them stories about the early days on the ranch, about a young cowboy who had made her laugh and a love that had transformed her life. When she joined Harrison, buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, the family gathered to remember them both. The stories flowed freely, tales of Harrison's humor and Laura's strength, of the partnership they had forged and the love that had been the foundation of everything they built. Their youngest grandson, named Harrison after his grandfather, stood and shared a memory. "Grandma told me once that she came to Nevada expecting loneliness. She thought her life was over, that she would never be happy again. But Grandpa, he filled her days with laughter and her nights with warmth. He gave her a family and a home and a love that lasted their whole lives. That is what I want to remember most about them. They proved that it is never too late for happiness, that love can find you even when you are not looking for it, and that the best things in life are worth taking a risk for." As the family dispersed, returning to their own homes and lives, the ranch remained solid and enduring, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other and were willing to work for their dreams. The house that Harrison had constructed for his bride still stood, expanded and updated over the years, but still fundamentally the same, still full of the warmth and laughter that had always defined it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the Nevada sky in shades of orange and pink, family members swore they could feel the presence of Laura and Harrison, still together, still watching over the legacy they had created, still in love after all these years. The harsh landscape that Laura had once found so alien had witnessed the unfolding of a great love story, a tale of two people who found each other against the odds and created something beautiful that would endure for generations. From loneliness to love, from heartbreak to healing, from a torn shirt and a 50-cent mending job to 45 years of marriage and a family that spread across Nevada and beyond. It was a story worthy of the Wild West, a story of courage and perseverance and the transformative power of love. Laura had arrived expecting loneliness, but Harrison Wade had filled her days with laughter and her nights with warmth. And together, they had built a life that was richer and fuller than either of them had ever dreamed possible. It was a good ending, a happy ending, exactly the kind of ending they both deserved.